So thanks for sharing. Thanks for joining. Very excited. Personally, we've done a lot of webinars, but Kai is, just for context, one of my favorite leaders and speaker. I am very excited about this session. I do think you will have something tangible to take away. And we also very encourage an interactive conversation. So me and my team will be moderating the chat room. If you have any questions at any time or any ideas that you want to bring up, please drop in the chat and we will try our best to answer everything as well. So Kai, looks like we are starting to have a very full group. So I would suggest, let's kick off with the session. And thanks for your time. Thanks for speaking with us today, Kai.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And great to see in the chat multiple people dialing in from all over the place, and to see the different roles that you have. Seems to be a lot of in RGM community, so that is great to see. So today we will talk a little bit about change management and how to implement and drive RGM excellence. My name is Kaj-Dac, and I work for Orkla in our Center of Excellence, and people from US, Venezuela, other places outside of Europe probably haven't heard about us. So I'll just give a brief company background. We are the Nordic FMCG market leaders, working with multiple brands in multiple categories. In fact, our heritage dates back all the way to 1806, and in total we have a portfolio of over 300 local brands. So it's quite a lot of different brands here. These brands are then dissected and structured into 12 different portfolio companies. Jotun dealing with paint, chemicals. We have Orkla Foods Europe, food ingredients, confectionery and snacks, health. We have a pizza company, spices in India, home and personal care, house care, sports and nutrition, and also a clothing brand. So it's quite the scope, quite the breadth. In terms of central governance, we have 3 Center of Excellences. I'm in sales, but we also have 1 Center of Excellence for marketing and innovation and 1 for sustainability. And the idea is to support all of these different portfolio companies in these key areas. However, one distinct feature of Orkla is a very strong local autonomy, meaning that each of these different portfolio company doesn't have one way of working. For example, the Orkla Foods Europe, the one to the left, each business unit have their own head office, their own management team, their own commercial processes, their own way of working. So there's a really strong local autonomy here, which is great if you want to have a quick route to innovation. You have no central barriers in terms of your route to market. You're quite agile, you know your market best, and every market is different. At least that's the idea of it. From our perspective, however, driving a central governance and as a center of excellence, there are some interesting challenges that this pose. For example, how do you even grow a house of brands with over 300 different brands? How do you balance the local adaptation with the global leadership focus? And perhaps even more challenging is, how do you manage all of these multiple business units across different markets, different industries, different categories, different competitive situations, different retail landscape, and different revenue growth management maturities? That's a huge challenge. And how do you deal with this without a push mandate? Because typically in a center of excellence, in a central function, some have the luxury of a push mandate. This is the way to work. These are our best practices. Use these templates, these frameworks, and they have a push mandate to the regional business units. We don't have that luxury. So that's a critical challenge as well. And this is where the change management really comes into play, where we need to face these common barriers of change when we try to adopt and drive revenue growth management. So some of the most typical barriers of change that we're facing, and I'm sure all of you have encountered these in some variations. What is the number one barrier to change? Typically, it's the fear of the unknown, the uncertainty, the unknown. What is going to change? That can be really scary. You don't know what's happening or why. So that is typically the first thing we need to address. The other challenge can also be, how is it going to change? We might know that change is inevitable. It needs to happen. We know it's going to happen, but how is it going to happen? How is it impacting me, my team, my function, my way of working, my daily business? That can also be extremely scary. And sometimes, even if the organization wants to change, it's not always ready to change. You don't have the right people in place, right capabilities, right setup to drive the change. So addressing how is equally important. And lastly, not knowing the strategic purpose of why. Why do we need this change? Is it necessary? Why are we even doing this? These are some of the most typical barriers of change management that we encounter, and it's quite important to address all of them to really enable and drive the success factors of RGM. So translating these into an RGM perspective then is quite important and something we spent quite some time on. So the first one, what is going to change? Well, first of all, what is revenue growth management? Typically, we see a lot of people have heard about it, but once we ask them to define it or elaborate or talk more about it, very few are actually able to do that, especially across different functions. They've heard about it, but they can't really put their finger on it, make it tangible. So the first thing we need to address here is really, let's demystify it. It's not rocket science. This is what it is. This is what we mean with RGM. This is what we mean with revenue growth management. So that's quite important to do. Because if we don't know what it is, then how are we expected to execute on it? How are we supposed to apply it? That's really hard, right? If you don't know what it is. So that is also something we're spending a lot of time on, focusing on the fundamentals, linking the strategy processes to execution. And I will give more examples on this in a few minutes. And third reason is, why is it important? Typically, RGM is a person or a job position, but it's not limited to that person. It's a cross-functional, it's a mindset, a way of working that is cross-function. So it's really important to elaborate on that as well, to have that clear strategic intent and communication, to emphasize on the collaboration. It's not a one-person job. This is something that can be applied throughout the entire value chain to enable a winning organization. So we've taken these typical barriers and translated them to an RGM perspective and really, okay, we need to nail this. We need to be able to answer these barriers in order to actually implement and drive change and revenue growth management, which then really helped us focus in our center of excellence. What is our mode of operation? So we quite quickly identified 3 things that we always need to deliver on. We need to be relevant. We need to be able to scale and drive synergies, and we need to be action-oriented. And it's quite important to address all of this, because otherwise, if you don't understand it, you don't know how it's applied, typically then when you're supposed to do NRM or RGM, it becomes on top. It's more of a reporting tool. It loses its value if it's not relevant. I also talked about earlier how every market is different. That is true, but if we're addressing the unique needs of every market, there's very little scalability, very little synergies. So actually, we need to dissect and understand. Actually, yes, markets are different, but many markets are also having some things in common. So what's the things that are in common? Because if we identify that, then we can scale and grow those opportunities. And last but not least, RGM is not a rocket science. It shouldn't be a theory. It should be applicable. So really help and improve the daily businesses by being action-oriented. So we took these 3 things and really said, well, we need to be able to deliver this as a center of excellence. This needs to be part of our mode of operation. Because as a center of excellence, we actually adapt and play different roles based on the needs of our portfolio companies or the business units that we're supporting and helping. Ideally, we want to have the latest best practices. We want to have the knowledge library with the best synergies, best practices across our entire company. So we always want to build a knowledge capital in this knowledge library. But we also want to build the capabilities with sparring, training, workshops, and it can be either with the super users locally, the local RGM, net revenue managers, or topic experts, but it can also be a wider training sessions where we actually, hey, let's actually harmonize and demystify RGM once and for all across every functions. So we have the cross-functional training sessions just to make sure that everyone have the same view on what it is. I said before that we need to be action-oriented, so sometimes we're actually jumping in as a project owner to really help with the implementation. And the fourth role that we sometimes deliver on is a task force. Our old way of working was that we came in as a SWAT team. We helped and did all the NRM analysis, RGM analysis, identified all the pros and cons and assessment, etc. And then we said, okay, this is a strat plan. These are the identified opportunities. Here, go and make it happen. That didn't really have a great impact because it was something on top. And typically something else happened. COVID happened, a war happened, price increases happened, and it wasn't really fully integrated. So what we have shifted in a task force focus is actually, well, scalability synergies. Let's automate some of the analytical tools that we see are relevant and applicable across multiple business units and help them automate a lot of these tools so they can focus on doing the actions. So I said earlier about how different markets are different, and that's what we're actually challenging, because I would say that most markets have more things in common than they are different. So we spent some time in looking and dissecting, okay, what is actually in common, regardless of the business, market, category, brand, or industry. And it's not rocket science. We're all working with people. So building capabilities is always relevant and applicable. And again, I said relevant. We need to ensure that we're being relevant to the people that we're working with. And one way of doing that was actually to start asking the right questions. And the right questions are not, what are you doing to drive RGM? Because if they don't know what it is, they can't really make it tangible. They don't really know how to execute it. So instead, we started asking, well, how's business going? How's your customer performing? How's your category performing? How's your brand performing? Do you understand what's growing, what's not growing? If not, and then we went on from there by asking the right questions. Do you have the right information you need to do the things you need to do? These people are also stuck in various processes. And that's something that we could help challenge, inspire, and improve by taking an outside-in perspective. Because typically you're used to a certain way of working, you're stuck in certain processes, and it's sometimes hard to see the bigger picture, especially when it's across functions. So an example here, for example, we see that RGM is really important and there's multiple analysis we can do. For example, in an innovation plan, marketing should definitely apply RGM analysis, price pack architecture, use price ladders, price curves to see what pack sizes should be introduced, what price points are out there that we should actually enable and capture with new products. These were not always linked because RGM was seen as something sales or finance should do. So it wasn't applied throughout the various processes, which then is linked to the tools. What tools do we have to identify the insights and the actions that we should do? And even if we have the same question, we could sometimes see that different functions had different tools that they used to find out the right answer, meaning it's a lot of double work. It's room to scale and improve here. And by finding the core tools and analysis that are actually applicable and relevant across marketing, finance, sales, Well, once we identify those, well, then we could scale those and automate those, because that's created the biggest value. Of course, there's more details to this, but we basically analyzed these different buckets to see the RGM maturity. How well are our different business units performing when it comes to people, processes, and tools? And we could find some weaknesses, opportunities, etc. Because the main purpose was we want to accelerate the speed from insights into actions. That is really what we want to enable and help our businesses with. Sometimes we needed to build the people. Sometimes we need to improve the processes. Sometimes we need to focus on the tools. But what we saw most commonly, the biggest impact is when you actually link all of these, when you deal with the right people, the right capabilities, in the right processes, in the right tools. That's when we have the full impact that RGM can deliver. So I'm going to take a short break here and ask you guys a question. So it's going to be an individual pop quiz. You're going to get a pop-up window and write the answer there and not in the normal chat. So we have 30 seconds. I'm going to ask a question and then write in the pop-up window. Okay? So if the below are all true, 1 equals 5, 2 equals 27, 3 equals 125, 4 equals 1,880, what does 5 equal? So 30
Launching
seconds.
the poll right now. And the poll is here. You can now fill in the poll. I see a lot of answers coming in. What does 5 equal?
So we have 10 seconds. 5, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, I'm ending the poll now. Last chance. Poll has ended, and I'm sharing the results with you. Few details. Oh, actually. Okay.
Do we see any answers?
Yes, I can. The answers are actually only in my browser, but
Yeah.
I can tell you.
And if you do a voiceover, how many were able to get the right answer?
One person got the right answer, actually.
Okay. And how many responses?
No, 3 person got the right answer. And we have 20 responses.
Okay. So if the below are all true, 1 equals 5, what does 5 equal? The answer is 1. So if 1 equals 5, then 5 equals 1. So it's a little bit of a trick question, but it's also to illustrate a point and lesson here that it's really easy to overthink and get caught in analysis paralysis. We spend time trying to find the patterns between the wrong things, when sometimes we just need to keep it simple and not reinvent the wheel. Sometimes the answer is right in front of us. 1 equals 5, so 5 equals 1. Because it's really easy to get lost out there when there are hundreds of different RGM-related analysis. It's really tricky. So getting stuck and overloaded with information, stuck in analysis paralysis, that happens quite frequently. And especially when RGM is more than just pricing and profitability, if it's, more RGM levers to this, then, there's an ocean of analysis to be done out there. So it's very easy that we just get stuck in the, the hamster wheel, where you just do a lot of number crunching, you just create a lot of great visualizations, graphs, etc., but it's not necessarily action-oriented. So we want to emphasize on, sometimes we don't need to reinvent the wheel for every category, every customer, every brand, etc. Try and focus and identify the 20% of the analysis that generates the 80% of the output. Because if we do that, then we're more likely to spend the time on the right things. So to put this into a context, this is our perspective and the way we are working with RGM and how we are demystifying RGM to make it more tangible. So our definition of RGM and the way we're working with it is RGM is a fact-based approach to drive long-term growth through value creation for us, our customers, and consumers. This is how we work with it. Now, to be frank, there's still a lot of buzzwords in there, but there are 3 things I would like to emphasize on. First of all, it's a fact-based approach. It's data-driven decisions. This is not something we're making up. We're strengthening our commercial gut feelings with data-driven analysis, a fact-based approach. Value creation is probably one of the biggest buzzwords out there, and I'm going to break it down to you very shortly. But then the third one is, it's not only about us, it's about our customers and consumers, the triple win. We cannot win without our customers, and we win with them through our consumers. So let's go back to the value creation. What do I mean with value creation, and how can we create value for us, our consumers and customers? The way we demystify this is really focusing on the basics by focusing on the right product at the right place with the right promotions at the right price for the right person. That's how we can create value creation. This is how we demystify it, because this is tangible. This is relevant for key accounts, marketing managers, category managers. It's very much tangible. And we use these 4 Ps, product, place, promo, and price, to impact the value equation, to drive penetration, frequency, and basket size, because that is what drives the category expansion and what we want to do as a category leader. Because you can only drive the category expansion by recruiting more shoppers, penetration, make them purchase more often, frequency, or making them spend more in terms of basket size, either in monetary terms, in volume, or in units. So nailing the basics becomes quite critical. And this is what we mean with RGM and how that can help us enable category expansion. Because like I said before, we're dealing with multiple businesses that have different industries, different markets, different categories, different situations, etc. And we still need to be relevant. We need to be able to scale, and we need to be action-oriented. So to adopt and deal with this, we really, okay, let's set the floor. Let's start with the very basics. And to us, we identify, the top 5 RGM analysis just to set the baseline foundation. These are the usual suspects, the most likely analysis that you should do to start out, because we're all working with different categories. In some business units, they have over 30 categories. And what we saw there is that multiple category managers have their own category overviews. They have their own take on their category trees. And they, again, were reinventing the wheel. Sometimes they had this internal competition where they wanted to outperform each other. But what that really led to was more headache for everyone involved, because every time you looked at the same question, what's happening in the category, you had a new visualization, a new way of looking at it. And it just was inefficient, and we focused on the wrong things. So here we typically recommend a Marimekko chart, because it gives a good overview of what's happening in our categories. We also want to highlight what's growing, what's not growing, what is developing in our categories. And you can use a simple scatter plots for this, using, for example, the value versus volume on the X and Y axis, just to quickly see what's growing and what's not, what's driving the category. We're often always dealing with pricing. So instead of doing hundreds of different price analysis, we always recommend price ladders and price curves as a baseline, just to understand the price and pack size impact. And last but not least, the holy grail of RGM, the profit pools are extremely important as well, just to track not only our profit development, but also our customers and how that has developed year on year. Doing this will help you set a good foundation, and it's equally relevant regardless of the customer, brand, or category that you're in, so you can have more fruitful conversations with people. That said, we often also see various reasonings. For example, we see in the category, okay, my category or my customer or my brand is declining. and it's declining double digits. It's losing a lot of both value and volume. So our normal question is about what's causing the change. And here's quite interesting that we get very creative answers. Some few people actually have, well, actually, I always look at this. But most of the times they don't have this structured approach. So they get creative and they look, well, maybe it's changing consumer behavior, international trends, food trends, or consumers have left the category. They start to speculate on information that they don't necessarily have. And that's where we said that could very likely be one reason. But let's remember the fundamentals. What did we say earlier? The core essence. We talked about the 4 Ps, and if 1 equals 5, it's the 4 Ps that can grow the category: right product, right place, right promo, right price. Well, then it's the same 4 Ps that can decline the category. So if 1 equals 5, then 5 equals 1. So starting here, we'll set a pretty solid foundation. We'll look at the product changes, look at the place changes, look at the promo changes, look at the price changes. What is likely the cause, and then you know what to deal with it, rather than boil the ocean and do SKU level analysis on everything. This will definitely help you point you in the right direction. And this is a quote that I really enjoy. If you cannot do great things, then do small things in a great way. So the small things here being the 4 Ps, they're not necessarily small, but they're typically seen as basic. It's not the next gen. But before we jump to the next gen, it's really important to just secure the core, the fundamentals, the core of your business, which in our case, as an FMCG player, is the 4 Ps. And if we can do that really good, well, then great results will follow. That said, we're not happy with the small things. We want great things, and we want them in a great way as well. We want to accelerate and drive this as a category leader. So we also want to accelerate this RGM transformation journey through advanced analytics. And everything I've said before is really just the foundations, just setting the floor so we have something to stand on and to build on. It's actually all based on historical information, typically market data, point of sales data, Nielsen data, etc. But it just looks at what happened and why. We also need to look forward. So predictions, simulations, future-looking analysis. And sometimes you have really great capabilities in-house, sometimes you don't, and then it can be really good to partner up with external vendors. So for example, in our case, we partnered up with Buynomics in price simulations to really accelerate in this, to really capture what capabilities that we cannot build in-house. We also want to generate or leverage, the processing speed and power of AI in generative RGM, meaning AI can really enable and help us accelerate the insight generation and help us in our decision-making to make the right actions so that we don't spend time on just creating insights, because knowledge is great, but that's not what's going to drive the results. We need to act on the knowledge that we have, and AI can really accelerate this insight generation at a much faster pace than ever before. So we need to leverage that as well. So with that said, I just have one final slide to wrap up my final thoughts. And that is to be relevant by demystifying RGM. It's not rocket science, so focus on the fundamentals and make sure that you're linking the strategy, processes, and executions to really be able to implement. There's a lot of analysis out there, so don't get stuck or overloaded with information. Don't reinvent the wheel. Find the 20% that generates the 80% of the output and stick to that and set a solid foundation around that, because that will help you become action-oriented faster. And that's what we want to do. We want to accelerate the speed from insights to actions. So that was some of my thoughts. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kai, for this very, very insightful presentation. Jan?
No, I would say, Kai, first of all, so good to have you as always. And I just want to say congratulations to Daniel, Carlos, and Patrick. So I definitely see some people smarter than me in the group here because I did not get the answer right in the first off. We also get some very interesting questions coming in. Specifically, Kai, what I really like about this session is you make change management something tangible, right? You provide a path of where to start, right? Who to start with, right? What are direction? What are the topics to begin? So we have some questions. I actually believe maybe Larry's question, and there's one about demystifying can be combined. So someone in the audience was wondering, well, do you think RGM should be both art and science, or do you see it more as one way or another? And I think it can also be connected with, right? Someone then also asked on top of that, do you think demystifying RGM, right? Should it be an always ongoing objective, or is it an exercise to do it one-off and then you move on to other objectives from change management or from RGM optimizations moving on?
All right, a lot of questions in there. I'll try and answer them as I understood them, and feel free to re-emphasize them if I don't fully answer them. But there was one interesting one about art or science. So let's start there. And I would say that it's probably a hybrid of both. It would be sad to think that, well, this is an exact science, because it's not. We're working with averages on averages, indicative analysis, etc. So even if we're using a fact-based approach, there might be things in the science that are not 100%, and we're also dealing with people. So I would say it's a mix of both, but it's about utilizing and understanding the science part, and okay, how can we actually strengthen our gut feelings and not just make things up? I believe this is the right product to launch because I think so. So it's about strengthening and minimizing the risk of failure. So in that part, it's the more science or probability part. And that's what we want to do, right? We want to be successful in our delivery, and it's about minimizing the risk of error and failures. And what we've seen is typically it's extremely competitive out there in the FMCG. Sometimes you can build a new brand, new product, and it takes years. You invest in a lot of marketing, product development, etc. And if you don't deliver, you can be kicked out from the store in just a few months. So the cost of failure is way too high. And that's why we cannot just rely on our art or our gut feelings. That's why we want to use the science that we have and extract maximum information and knowledge from that to increase our likelihood of success.
I love that answer, Kai. And actually, there's, I think, also a good one to bridge with Adrian, because you mentioned about optimization and success. What is value creation to you, right? How do you define that with the team? And is it based on a single KPI, or is it something that change continuously?
Yeah, great answer. And that is why it's such a buzzword, because what is value creation? What's value for me is not necessarily valuable for you. And is it for the environment? Is it for the company? What exactly is value creation? That's why we need to dissect it a little bit. And in our case, it was, the right product, etc. But here is where the strategic communication becomes really important, because what is our strategy? Are we going for a value strategy or volume strategy or profit strategy? That also affects in the execution part of it. So I think it needs to be dissected, and value can be different depending on the strategy and the context. But typical KPIs that we see from a business perspective can, of course, be profitability per kilo or the profit margins. It can be market shares, etc. But what is important is that it's linked to the strategy, because if we're doing a value strategy, but all our execution of RGM is a volume strategy, well, then we're not creating the value according to the strategy. We're not doing the right things. And that's what I mean with linking the strategy to the execution.
Nice. Thanks, Kai. And one thing I think also I'm hearing that a lot from the industry as we talk about change internally, we know that macroeconomy is also changing, right? So what's your view on integrating things that are constant changing in the macroeconomy aspect into actually revenue management analysis, integrate that with your change management strategy?
Very good question. If you look back historically, pre-COVID, one success factor was pricing. Focus on pricing. That is the biggest contributor to your profit margins. And that's why a lot of people are associating RGM with pricing, because it had such a big impact on the profit margins. But as we've seen, with COVID, the war, this vicious cycle of where the macroeconomics are changing rapidly, COGS increases are increasing, then suddenly pricing is not the answer anymore, because suddenly shoppers are price sensitive. We are reaching a consumption fatigue where maybe they want to, but they're not able to afford the same products that they have anymore. We see a massive downward downtrade to private label, hard discounters, etc. So we can't just rely on price. We need to use the mix management and really leverage every RGM lever. Just look at price is not enough. We need to look at the product offering, pack sizes, promo activations, and also the cross-functional collaborations, because procurement plays a massive part in this with the COGS developments, sales in their customer dialogues, but also the brand. Because if we're not fueling our brand with value, well, then consumers are going to continue to downtrade because they don't see the point of a branded good. So that's where we need to be more collaborative and more flexible in the mix management approach to adapt to the vicious cycle or changing macroeconomics.
I love that answer, Kai. And I feel like, especially when the market is becoming more volatile, it's very useful to have this change management or this change mindset embedded in the team as well, right? So we can move forward, become more flexible, and be ready for whatever that comes in as a challenge and as an opportunity in the markets. And with that, actually, too bad it's anonymous. I think it's also a great question. What I'm observing now is that the RGM is getting more spotlight in the industry, which is really good. And someone in the audience asking that, how do you make sure that this RGM mindset, right, revenue management driven concept is embraced not just for your core, category management colleagues or revenue management colleagues, but also other key functions, perhaps in the leaderships, to also help support the success?
Very important question. And one of our barriers, and maybe people in the audience can prove me wrong, but in our cases, we've seen that we're never able to drive RGM, implement it, and execute on the change management without the leadership and top-down buy-in and approach, because this cannot be a bottom-up approach, because it needs to be fully supported from the leadership team, because it is cross-functional. So key account manager cannot drive this alone. We really need to work across functions. And the only way to do that is really to have the management team fully on board, fully supporting this. And the other part I would say is also to say that even though RGM have different levers, different functions can apply them in different situations. So it's also to understand when and how to execute it and who should execute it. Like the example I said before, typically marketing, they say, well, RGM, that has nothing to do with me, but actually a lot of it has to do with, optimizing their portfolio, strategy, etc. So it's just creating that awareness and make it tangible through easy tools that help their daily questions. For example, about, well, what is the best products out there in our portfolio? Are we prioritizing them accordingly? What is the right product that we should launch, etc.
And Kai, in your experience, what has worked well in then also onboarding the leadership or onboarding the wider commercial team to support the change management in RGM?
Tricky question, because it's so easy to say, yes, this is super important, we support it, but then actually no time is allocated, no stakeholders assigned. So suddenly when they say, well, talk to the sales guys or marketing people, suddenly, they haven't really been briefed. This becomes on top. So it's a really tricky question, but it's really to not underestimate the change management, really, because it takes time to change. So not underestimate the scope and effort needed, because this is not going to change overnight. And that it's not just the strategy or the tools, it's also linking it to the people, capabilities, and processes. So it's really a longer term change management project that's, a workshop is not going to enable, and we're not done after, okay, I've shown you what RGM is. Now everything is fixed.
Yeah, fully agree. It's actually a much more difficult task and require much more resources, but at the same time also generate a lot of value for, and a lot of people say, sustainable growth, right? And I also do believe that a good change management mindset and process is important to enable that. We also have a question from Hector earlier asking, so when you mention scale in your presentations, right, could you give a few examples on how to really, right, scale different value and functions within RGM?
Yeah, so in our case, it was, okay, it's a fact-based approach. And to be honest, and when we talk to the leadership team, these are a set of analysis, etc. Are you doing them? And typically they said, yeah, we're doing this analysis. Because again, there are hundreds of different analyses. Most likely people have already product analysis, place analysis, promo analysis. But that said, doesn't mean that the existing analyses are, optimal. And like I said before, analysis is done, but it's not necessarily the ideal ones. They're double work. So in terms of scalability is really finding the 20% that are relevant across functions. And we've seen it so many times with, again, the category overview example, category managers or people dealing and being responsible for a category, the way they work with it differs quite significantly when it doesn't have to be. So it's really simplify and find that core that sales, finance, marketing, categories can agree on, and use that to scale. Find the commonalities and the core. And then another scale is, of course, to finish off that point, we see a lot of old way of working is like from Excel to PowerPoint, and that's not super scalable. So automatizing this analytical process is definitely something we're focusing a lot on to drive scale. So you don't spend time on just, stuck in Excel.
Absolutely. And I think this actually connects very well to, I believe, one of the last questions we have from Larry as a follow-up, because you mentioned also as a journey, you showed us also, right, we want to move from automation to predictive, right, to also AI to accelerate the processing time, right? So for Larry, he is also wondering, he said, well, we have RGM like 1.0, which is looking at 5 levers. Kaj, I'm personally not actually familiar with RGM, the 3.0, but he said there's 2.0 integrated execution, RGM 3.0 big bets, now growth leadership. To you, what would be the right, I would say, maybe version or the most relevant RGM setup you would share back with the team?
No, it's quite interesting. And Larry, please connect on LinkedIn, because I'm curious to hear more of your thoughts here. But I do agree with the maturity journey. We've seen typically in the first phase, RGM is not really structured. It's only about pricing. It's an ad hoc approach. And then the first level is, well, okay, we actually identified multiple levers. And then the stage after that is linking that to the strategy. And then a stage after that is the precision. Not only do we have one strategy, but it's adaptable to the individual customers and their store profiles. And we also have the automated solutions to enable that. And then the final stage is where this is part of DNA and the processes are integrated in the daily businesses. So there are definitely sequential steps that you should do. I think that is the right way to go, because otherwise you not only will get overwhelmed with task and information, but one way of accelerating change management is, focusing on the quick wins. And to do these step milestones will enable you to generate the positive attraction to succeed. Because if you're going for the end game right away, which is a multi-year journey, then people won't see any change, and then they will, well, it's not working. So that's one thought.
Well, before we close it off, Kaj, I just want to personally say thank you so much for spending the time sharing your perspective with the audience today. As you mentioned, change management takes a lot of efforts and resources and commitment. And hopefully through today's session, right, we also bring a bit more awareness, a bit more interest, right? Also a bit more idea and inspiration into change management to everyone in RGM. Please, after this session, connect with Kaj. Kaj is one of the most intelligent leader I've seen in RGM. I do believe as a community we should stay connected. So thank you so much for your time. Hopefully we will see you soon again in another event, in another webinar, in another conversation. And I will also hand back over to Jonathan to close it up. If you still have any questions after the sessions, feel free to reach out to me or to reach out to Kaj, and then we can continue this discussion together.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so
Great
much.
Questions from the audience.
Yes, definitely. A super engaged chat again, a super nice session today. Quick reminder, everyone, that we have our next webinar with guest speaker Kaj-Dac former Plades, on 7 game-changing strategies for introducing AI into RGM in 3 weeks, September 20th. I linked it here in the chat. You also get the webinar recording together with an invitation by end of today. And yeah, thank you again, Joanne, Kaj. Amazing session. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. Have a nice weekend and see you in the next one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.